This weapon is your life. I feel like this single line, almost a throwaway in its delivery, is one of the most detrimental things that could have ever been uttered to the fledgling Jedi community. It put an undue amount of focus on what was the sole possession of a young and arrogant apprentice who had been damned with the weight of prophecy. While the sentiment was likely to tie the Jedi of the mythos to the samurai of history, who treated their sword as their soul, it instead put the focus on the aesthetics, the materials, the design, and the represented color of the blade. It turned the perfect image for the Jedi into a point of fashion and a bauble for the ego. Couple that with the commercialization of the prop versions of this fantasy weapon, and it has quickly become as central to the image of the modern community at large as the screen accuracy of the rest of the semi-monastic costume. It is a damning line, because it is filled with the chance for understanding and self-reflection, but was not taken as such an exercise. So, let's take a look at the potential depths of this statement and see if we can correct the course a little bit. First, we have to look at what that weapon really is. First and foremost, it is a symbol for the Jedi, a blade that is bright and unmistakable when in use, but tucked away, almost hidden, when not needed. It is a difficult weapon, one of the most dangerous weapons within the mythos, not merely for its destructive potential, but because of the huge potential for self-inflicted and likely devastating injury. One slip-up, one swing too close to the body, one bad rotation of the wrist at the wrong time, and a student could be permanently disfigured, disabled, or outright deceased. As such, it is a weapon that requires inhuman levels of focus and training. That level of refinement and control would rank even an average Jedi Knight amongst the greatest sword masters of the modern world. It is also a highly impractical weapon within the era of the mythos that has been most told to the Jedi of the world. In an arena of projectile and plasma weapons, its limited range seems to be at a severe detriment. When the firearms of the day have sweeping stun settings, it seems almost barbaric to wield a weapon that requires close proximity to dispatch an enemy. It is said that the hilt is heavy and holds some unique gyroscopic forces when active, which is why its use was almost completely two-handed in the original trilogy. That means that the Jedi would be fighting the rotational forces with each move. Similar to holding a gyroscope while spinning, that exercise might be rather clumsy. Later media seems to dispose of this concept, however, so we can put a pin in this point. So, we have a blade that is either mostly or completely weightless. When training with a sword, a staff, or any other such weapon, the weight of the extended shaft or blade is part of the motion and part of the control. If the weapon is as close to weightless as it is presented in the majority of the mythos, that would be like swinging a flashlight, easy to do lightly, but hard to stop in a moment of need. All of this makes training with such a weapon an action of near lunacy for anyone who cannot train it seriously. To do anything less would surely end in disaster. This is why the training of the weapon is of such extreme focus within the mythos. That is not how they are often treated in the world, though. The way they are often used for props in group photos as part of a costume leans far more heavily into fandom than any representation of something that could be called a Jedi's life. It lacks severity, and thus lacks the respect one must pay such a devastating weapon, just as the Jedi in the world would need to respect any weapon they train with. Without reflection on the sheer lethality of the weapon, the weight of its responsibility cannot be integrated into the training of a student of the Jedi way. This is not meant to be either a morbid statement or an admonishment to any on the way. It is merely a contrast in conditions. With today's levels of weapon technology, the closest equivalent would be training to carry a personal firearm. The legal responsibilities, the continuous training to minimize any collateral damage should it be needed, and the ethical questions of carrying such a weapon are equivalent, even if not as elegant in presentation. Next, we have to look a little deeper into the training at the Jedi Temple. It is shown that even small children are entrusted with some variation of these weapons, but the written media informs that these are training sabers, which can be used with training remotes and even sparring, as they only shock and stun with contact, maybe a slight burning of the hair on the point of contact. This would be akin to a shinai in that it is designed for serious training, but mitigating the potential for damage. They were not merely handing children a weapon that would put them in more danger than their adversary, and just hoping for the best. Graduating from these training weapons would surely be a very big moment for a young student. That would be like any martial arts promotion, from a lower to higher rank. It would require observation from instructors, and likely a formal examination. This test would undoubtedly be very stressful, to be sure that all the polish and precision shown during training does not fall away under more strenuous conditions. It represents years of practice, of correction, of refinement, and of dedication. It takes learning to respect the weapon, because while the training saber might shock and singe, the real thing would take your arm as fast as your foe's. What we have, instead, are durable toys that can be beat against one another with little to no lasting consequence, a bruised hand and a bruised ego, most often than not. However, the props can take serious damage to both the shaft and electronic internals, especially if won from the less expensive side of the market. This can be done equally as efficiently with cheaper and more widely available training weapons, as with the previously mentioned shinai, without the risk of needing repairs to work the way someone wants them to. A good shinai costs a fraction of what a median-cost prop setup does after all. Next, let's look at those electronic repairs and see deeper into the weapon within the mythos. The internals of a fictional lightsaber are intricate, and as they are fictional weapons, mostly made up science to explain their function. However, the mythos does mention that the first activation of a newly built weapon is the most dangerous, as it has the potential to explode. That means that each Jedi has to undergo a great deal of training in the theory of lightsaber technology before they can begin to build their own. While the Jedi Temple had a droid to instruct in the process and offer helpful hints on which components would work best with one another, that did not absolve them from knowing how to do the work, and even doing the work on their own. This was an entirely different level of danger for the young student. That also speaks nothing towards the pilgrimage to the crystal caves to bond with the Kyber that would be the heart of the blade, and the conduit between the Force, the blade, and the Jedi. This process is one that could be wholly sporadic or well planned as a group from the temple. However, it was not just ordering it through a digital marketplace and tossing some batteries in the bottom. It was an intensely personal experience, a defining moment in the training of a student, and one they would often have to do again if their weapon were lost or otherwise destroyed. This is an extension of that rank promotion. They were deemed ready to begin this journey into themselves, into their training, and into the Force. Upon completion, their work was inspected before first ignition when at the temple, but the construction is not just an alignment of parts. It is a connection to the Kyber, a connection to all the electronic components, and finding the balance between them in the Force. The meditation techniques involved in this process are shown to last anywhere between a few hours to a few weeks. The Jedi and the Kyber had to come together in a type of synthesis, and only when the proper alignments had been found and the proper bond had been made would the weapon work properly. When Qui-Gon spoke to Anakin about being a Jedi, he said that the training would be difficult, and that even if he made it, it would not be an easy life. It is in that sense that Obi-Wan meant that this weapon was Anakin's life. It was the manifestation of countless hours of training with Boken or training sabers, countless hours of learning the intricacies of very delicate and dangerous electronics, and countless hours of focus and meditation to align so perfectly with the Force to be able to accomplish the building process. The community at large doesn't often dive so deep into the practice of its members and their prop weapons. One or two might make the process more personal, closer to the mythical equivalent. But the truth of the matter is that we cannot really know the weight of that weapon through just purchasing one alone. There are ways to make it more of a transformative experience, but it is easier to just buy one and accept the high price tag of a well-built unit as the sacrifice needed. This cheapens the symbol, transforming it into a piece of a costume. That makes it no longer a symbol for the Jedi, but rather the symbol of a fan. There is nothing wrong with being a fan of Star Wars or of the Jedi. It is undoubtedly what brought the overwhelming majority of us to the foot of the mountain. It is what draws us to absorb the lessons we can find, and even to contemplate the meaning of the most minor of statements. The mythos is rich with such lessons and inspirational quotes. However, there is a difference between being a fan of the mythos and being a follower of the Jedi way. Many don't see any need for the prop to have any weight on their spiritual refinement, but oddly still feel that they need the physical representation to be part of the group. It is a bit of a dissonance. No one needs any props, costumes, jewelry, or any other bauble to walk the way, and anyone who says otherwise doesn't have a fixed bearing on the path. They are fixated on the trappings that surround the word. This is my purpose for the video. It is not to dump on people who enjoy these props. They absolutely do represent a very important aspect of the Jedi way in the mythos, and that connection is tempting to pursue. Absolutely. In fact, in the earliest days of the Jedi community, we used to build them as part of our own development, but we didn't buy them whole. They were always pipe couplings, conduit fittings, and a long, wandering trip to the hardware store. We learned to use rotary tools, drills, rivet guns, and hand saws to cut and shape these handles into what we felt spoke to us the most. Many used the same basic design, sure, but no two were ever the same. There was always a bit of the builder in each one built, as it should be. They became a test of physical skills and tools of meditation. Some would fill the hilts with wire-wrapped crystals and resin, turning them into what are called orgonite or orgon generators, using them as a focusing talisman when training in the Force. The kits for a light-up blade were often fragile and rather expensive in those days, and so they were almost never seen by the group made up, at the time, of mostly broke teenagers. Otherwise, we trained in the Jedi arts as best we could, taking up martial arts practices, both of empty hand and of the sword and staff. Not all of us had the benefit of live instruction, and this was an era before YouTube, so instruction was not always easy to get. But many of us found a way. This is where the lightsaber took those who have found their greatest connection to the Force through the Budo arts. They found the structure and discipline that the online Jedi community didn't have, and honestly still cannot replicate through digital media alone. It is a limitation of the media itself, not the failings of any one person or group. What started as training in the Budo arts because Jedi had swords became something far deeper for many, as if guided by the Force. They found the inner peace that comes from channeling emotions into action, the growing knowledge of the self and the Force intertwined, the serenity of the body in flow, the harmony of the breath with movement, and the Force beneath even the most devastating techniques. They found the Jedi code in action and the way beneath their feet. They found that the Budo arts are not just combat methods. They teach many more skills than fighting. Older schools include things like personal energy cultivation, pressure point activation for both compliance and healing, and even some herbal medicine. Those who could not find such complete training found ways to supplement their training to include them, as these aspects were designed to be taught together, and thus there was a place for the knowledge once found. They also had these revelations tested through the rigors of training. Real training doesn't stay what most would consider fun for very long. It is hard and trying. It is a long-term commitment, even if not a lifelong one. It is the training of a student into a Jedi Knight, the trials of the flesh. It is being faced with the intent of another person, becoming faster, stronger, and more serious the longer the student trains. This is how the weapon is a Jedi's life, acting as both a physical representation and a key to realization. This is the same as a samurai regarding their sword as their soul. It is a mirror into the truth, rather than an idol to be worshipped. The Jedi only finds the seriousness of the way when they walk the way seriously. Many do not take the way into a strong physical representation anymore. They glean lessons from the mythos and look at some characters as heroes, admired surely, but never taken as role models, because that would require them to mimic the role of a warrior monk. Most don't see a need for them in our modern world full of laws and the officers of their enforcement. Many do not ever get confronted with a situation where any type of martial training is needed. But that leads to the last point I have for this video. The Force speaks to those who know how to listen. We cannot listen to the whispers of the Force when we cannot quiet our own mind chatter. The training in the Budo arts leads to a point of input overload that can be a little unsettling at first, but is integral for communion with the Force. It is called many names, but when the mind becomes so intensely focused on a single thing or a single person, everything else falls away. We exist in the moment fully and completely. The moment is the eternal now. There is no before or after, even though the conditions of that eternal now can change. The change is accepted without question or confusion. When that single point of focus is a training partner, trying to strike you in the face or chest, that adaptability, while timelessly focused, is pretty helpful. Reaching that point of eternal now can be done while in meditation as well, but breaking the barrier between thinking that you are locked in and truly knowing can be much more difficult when still and quiet rather than when active. This point of eternal now holds not thought, no sound, no preferences, only active stillness. This silence of the mind is when we hear the whispers of the Force. It leads us through our senses, our intuition, and our observations. It puts us where we need to be. That leads some of us to act as warriors, standing in harm's way for another person. That leads others to taking an abnormal route home one day, after work, where they witness a wreck and rendering first aid while calling emergency services. It even leads us to talk to people we otherwise would not. Sometimes that is because they have information we need, but more often it is because they are in a point of personal turmoil, and our presence helps them see beyond their own storms. The Force leads us where we are needed, and the training of the whole of the way is what prepares us for that. Physical ability, mental fortitude, spiritual insight, and everything in between. This is the depth that can be found in the image of the lightsaber, but only when we use it as a symbol for reflection and transformation. They are a part of our training and the keys to very powerful transmutation, but they must be respected as the mythic weapons that they represent, not merely displayed as decoration. Take from this what you will. If this has helped bring clarity to your own walk along the way, then I have done my job. Force guide and protect you all.